The house on Fairview Lane looked perfect from the outside. Red brick, a manicured lawn, 2 cars in the driveway. People slowed down when they drove past because the place radiated the sort of steadiness they wished they had. Inside, though, something had begun to rot long before anyone noticed. It started the day Evelyn Monroe collapsed in the grocery store dairy aisle. She was 49, mother of 3, reaching for a carton of milk. The plastic burst as it hit the floor, and her skull followed a moment later. By morning, the local news ran looping security camera footage under the banner "Sudden Tragedy." They called it cardiac arrest, silent, unstoppable. The funeral drew a crowd large enough to fill the little hillside cemetery and to force the siblings to stand shoulder to shoulder for the first time in years. Jacob flew in from New York with a graying beard and nicotine-twitchy fingers. Sadie drove down from Portland, 2 restless kids in the back seat, and a husband who claimed work was the reason he stayed behind. Daniel, the youngest, had never left town at all. He still slept in his childhood room, orbiting the family home like a satellite that couldn't find the momentum to break away. Their father, Leonard, hovered a few feet from the casket, jaw tight, eyes impossible to read. Everyone else watched him the way you watch a dam you know is starting to crack. When the minister finished, Leonard didn't so much as blink. Jacob handled condolences. Sadie tried to keep the kids from stepping on graves. Daniel stared at the coffin as though he expected it to sit up and correct the story. Back at the reception, Daniel cornered Sadie in the kitchen. His eyes were too wide for grief alone. He said he found an envelope taped beneath their nightstand drawer, yellow with age. 1 word scrawled across the front: "Yours." The 2 of them slipped away from the crowd and tore it open. A single page in Evelyn's shaky handwriting said, "There is something you don't know about your birth. I tried to tell you, but he wouldn't let me. I'm sorry I wasn't stronger." Sadie sat on the edge of her childhood bed, staring at the note until the letters blurred. She and Evelyn had fallen out 4 years ago over something petty. Now she couldn't even remember what, but the silence that followed suddenly felt enormous. That night, long after the guests left, and Leonard retreated to the den with a refill of whiskey, Sadie crept into her mother's room and searched every drawer, every shoebox, every coat pocket. Nothing. Desperation finally drove her to the attic. She hadn't climbed that ladder since she was 10. Dust and cold air settled on her skin as she pushed aside old holiday decor and high school trophies no one could part with. A box marked "Donations" sat beneath a moth-eaten tarp. Inside were photographs of a woman who looked like Evelyn but wasn't, a baby who looked like Sadie but appeared in none of their albums, and an infant hospital bracelet stamped with Sadie's birthday but a different last name: Nora Miller. Downstairs, Leonard sipped whiskey in front of the muted TV like it was life support. When Sadie confronted him, he dismissed it as grief-fueled hysteria and suggested she get some sleep. She went to Jacob instead. In the garage, the smell of gasoline and stale smoke hung over them. Jacob listened, silent, until he mentioned the Miller name. Then his shoulders slumped, the reaction of someone who recognizes a truth he's tried to forget. He confessed that at 12, he'd overheard a fight between Leonard and Evelyn. He remembered Evelyn crying and Leonard repeating, "She'll never know. We made our choice." Jacob had found Sadie's adoption paperwork once, but Leonard snatched it away, promising to explain when the time was right. It never was. Over the next 3 days, Daniel drifted ghost-like around the house. He slept during the day, paced at night, said he heard Evelyn's voice in the hallway. When Jacob finally snapped and insisted Leonard tell them everything, Leonard threw them out of the study, screaming that dredging up the past would destroy what was left of the family. That night, Daniel vanished. His phone went dark, his apartment lock was changed, even his bank account sat frozen at $43. On the 4th morning, police divers pulled a rust-eaten sedan from the black water of Lake Crescent, 20 miles north. Inside were skeletal remains and a water-blurred note that read, "They lied. They buried me in silence. My name was Nora Miller." The detectives traced the car's registration back to 1989 and knocked on Leonard's door before lunchtime. Sadie watched her father swear he didn't know Nora, then collapse into a dining room chair the moment they left. That afternoon, Evelyn's will was unsealed. She had left the house solely to Daniel. Not Leonard, not jointly, just the son who was now missing. Leonard hurled a glass against the kitchen wall and called Daniel a mistake. Shards glittered on the tile like a warning. Jacob dragged Sadie outside while Leonard raged. On the porch, wind whipping across the yard, Jacob revealed a juvenile file he'd pulled from the basement safe. When Daniel was 13, a neighborhood girl disappeared. Daniel had been questioned but never charged. The girl's diary discovered in Daniel's backpack was turned over to Leonard, who made it vanish. Sadie's stomach knotted. She remembered Daniel's sleepless nights, the nightmares, the way Evelyn hovered over him when Leonard wasn't watching. She asked Jacob what her father had done with the diary. Jacob stared at the sky, saying nothing. That night, Sadie returned alone to the basement, unlocked a steel door that had always been off limits, and descended into a narrow room humming with an old fluorescent bulb. File cabinets lined the walls, police reports, newspaper clippings, letters, an archive of other people's tragedies cataloged in Leonard's precise handwriting. A single box sat in the center, stamped Miller case, sealed. Inside lay court transcripts, restraining order petitions, and a photograph of Nora smiling beside a tall woman who looked exactly like Evelyn. At the bottom of the stack was a sealed juvenile record belonging to Daniel. Sadie's hands shook so hard she nearly dropped it. Footsteps sounded overhead. A beam of light cut down the stairs. Jacob again. They spread the documents across the kitchen table like a macabre jigsaw puzzle. Leonard had been accused of assaulting Nora Miller in 1989, and Evelyn, then Evelyn Pierce, had been listed as a witness for the prosecution. The case was dismissed after Nora went missing. Months later, Evelyn reappeared with Leonard, newly married, pregnant with Jacob. Sadie pressed her palm against the table to steady herself. If Evelyn was once Evelyn Pierce, who was the younger woman in those attic photos? Why did the hospital bracelet bear Sadie's birthday but Nora's last name? The questions piled higher than the evidence. At dawn, police phoned Sadie. Daniel had been picked up barefoot on a highway, muttering about the girl in the well. He checked himself into a psychiatric ward under a false name. When Sadie visited, he refused eye contact, repeating only, "You were never supposed to know." Jacob kept digging. In a grainy protest photo from 1993, he recognized 3 linked arms: Evelyn Pierce, Nora Miller, and a woman identified as June Miller, Nora's twin sister. June was never listed as missing. Public records showed she legally changed her name in 1994 to Evelyn Monroe. The revelation stole Jacob's breath. The woman buried 2 weeks ago wasn't her mother at all. She was Nora's twin. The real Evelyn had vanished 30 years ago. Sadie returned to the family home, opened the front door, and felt the stale air crush back as if the house itself wanted to hold on to its secrets. Leonard sat at the dining table, an untouched coffee cooling before him, eyes red-shot. She stood across from him and set the photograph of the 3 women on the wood between them. Leonard's fingers twitched, then curled into fists. The dam inside him finally cracked, and one trembling sentence slipped out. "You don't understand what she did to us." Sadie realized she had barely scratched the surface of what he meant, and for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure she wanted the rest of the truth, only that it was coming, and it would tear whatever still held them together straight down the middle.